November 3rd, we have Fed Focus. This is our annual conference in which we're going to go over the 2012 appropriation process, the funding outlook by all the major agencies. We obviously, it's an opportunity to hear from government officials as well as an opportunity to network. And I mentioned this in the past weeks. We're going to have hundreds of colleagues from leading government contractors, government officials, and then, of course, Deltek's expert analysts in the defense and civilian sectors of the government. So this is an event that you won't want to miss. And, of course, special thanks to AOC Key Solutions for their sponsorship and their continued support. Here's the information. You also have the web link. This is, again, going to be sent out via email to everybody who's interested. So I highly encourage you to take some time, go to that event, and also utilize a lot of the tactics and things that you've heard on today's presentation to help make your business successful. So to dive into questions, and we're going to run some polls as well. The first question that we got came in, can you expound a bit on the imperative teaming agreement focus area details you touched on earlier?
Okay, the question again is on the teaming agreement details?
Correct.
Okay. There's a number of things that you want to have in a teaming agreement, one of which is an NDA, if you will, or a separate, or at least an agreement to protect each other's proprietary information. You want to make sure that the scopes of work are defined in the teaming agreement. Sometimes they're not defined. Some people use an excuse, well, we'll wait till the final RFP comes out, or we'll wait till we win the contract and then we'll sort it out. My suggestion to the group is that that's usually a disaster and a formula for lack of success. What you want to do is spell out in the best way that you can what the scopes of work will be, if not the actual levels of effort. If you can't do that in advance, at least agree on what we call the swim lanes. Company X is going to be responsible for this swim lane or this activity, if you will. Company Y will be responsible for this, and Company Z will be responsible for that. That's often an important part. Make sure that there are the appropriate flow downs that you might expect from the prime contract, and then make sure it's basically a win-win situation for all team members. If it's loaded in any one direction, it is basically a formula for the collapse of the team, or frustration, or certainly inefficiency that will ultimately rear itself. So make your team agreements ironclad and make them win-win.
Okay, great. One question I'll ask from my personal experience. I used to work for a company years ago. We did a lot of marketing and consulting for big technology companies. And one company, I won't mention their name, but was really interested in addressing the challenge the government was having with continuity of operations, COOP, disaster recovery. Did a lot of very successful events, huge amount of interest from the government, and they said, great, let's deliver it. And then all of a sudden the client said, well, gee, we can't. We don't have the ability and the resources to do that. How much do you see in the marketplace, smaller companies, mid-sized companies, or even larger companies, trying to be all everything to the government, address a particular challenge without really understanding maybe this is what our core is, this is not part of what it is that we do?
Yeah. I think in today's competitive market, companies think that if they can open the aperture wide and look at every opportunity possible, that they have a better chance of thriving or surviving or prospering or whatever. The facts are, as I pointed out in one of my keys, the answer is to use a laser focus and to drill down on those opportunities that really relate to your core competencies. It's better to be a specialist in a single area than a generalist across the board that has no value proposition to offer. Now, in the case of, let's say, something like continuity of operations or the challenges that you were describing, your win strategy has to have two pieces to it, or your capture strategy, I will. The first piece is how you're going to win the job, and the second piece is how you're going to execute the job once you get it. If you have a strategy that doesn't cover both of those prongs, then you really don't have a very good strategy. And that's why there's so much overcommitments and overpromising, and people are just doing the wrong thing because they think about winning and they say, well, we'll worry about the execution later, and it doesn't work.
Right. Don't overpromise and underdeliver.
That's right.
So this person wants some clarification. Can you say more about or clarify what is meant by you don't capture, they award? It was part of number 4, but this person said they didn't clearly get the point.
Well, the point is that the client, the customer, if you will, is ultimately the final decision maker, and they can award it on any number of different criteria. Generally, they're the ones that are expressed in the RFP, but they're often also not expressed. They're sort of subliminal. We like to look at it as that there are really three things that you need to address when you're trying to capture. The first one is, what are the client's needs? And those are the things that are generally expressed in an RFP. They're the things that they can let the contracting officers and the legal people will allow them to put in an RFP. It represents the baseline of what they need. This is what they need to have. The second thing, though, which they're generally not allowed to express, is what they want to have. And that sometimes is because they don't have the money, or they don't have the approval, or they don't have the pull, or they don't have the authority, but they do have this desire for that. And sometimes if you give them what they need, that gets you in the game, but if you give them what they want, that can make a difference in winning, and that's why they select you. That's why they award it to you. And then the third area is customer biases. And I don't mean prejudices necessarily. I mean preferences, that a given customer prefers, for example, a given computer system. If that's what they're looking for and you don't understand that, then you might be giving them the wrong system. Their bias is towards computer system X, and if you deliver Y, it's not going to hit the mark. So why we say that you don't capture, they award, it's because you can only provide your own value proposition. In the end, they have to interpret that in light of their needs, their wants, and their biases. And that's why they're the final decision maker, and they're the ones that actually award it. All we do is simply give them a good reason to, but in the end, we don't do it, they do it. That's the difference that I make in my distinction.
Okay. So to follow up on that question, if you're a small business that does have the bandwidth to do all the things that other smaller companies say they can, how would you recommend separating yourself so the buyer sees the value?
If you're a small company, small business?
If you're a small business that does have the bandwidth, right?
Very, very easy. At least it's easy in principle. It may be more difficult in execution. But the answer is, if you're a small business, act like you've been there before. Act like a big business. Make sure that your whole capture effort and your proposal effort is almost brand yourself as a big business, irrespective of your size. So use the techniques that big businesses use in terms of selection of key personnel, in terms of how your resumes look, in terms of how you lay out your proposal, in terms of what past performances that you cite and how they look in the package, between what promises and commitments you're prepared to make. These are all things that big businesses will do, and most of the small businesses do not do that. So that if it's like a set-aside and the government has a number of proposals, and let's say 5 of them, and 4 of them look like they were generated by a small business, but the 5th has the panache and the style and the polish of a big business, that's more likely to stand out and receive positive evaluation.
Great. So a couple of questions, they tie into each other a little bit. The first is, and we get this question a lot, how does someone get before a government customer? They're not answering my emails, they're not responding to my phone calls. How do I get in front of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is by figuring out what one of their needs are and then showing them how you're going to deliver it. Let me explain that. The first thing you have to decide when you talk about getting in front of a customer is, who is the customer? There are various customers, if you will. Sometimes there's the contracting officer, then there's the contracting officer's technical representative or the program people. There might be the Office of Small Business, Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization, the OSDA group. You have to decide who it is you want to talk to and who you're targeting. Then be early. By that I mean be well in advance of an RFP, well in advance of a blackout period, and then have something to say when you get in there to see them, but also be prepared to ask questions and give them an opportunity to expound. And the way we recommend that you do it is very simple, is send an email out to that particular contracting officer or that customer, tell them you want to meet, and tell them that why you want to meet and why it's important for the government to listen to what you have. Do not come in and say that you're here to make an introduction to my company or introduce you to my company, because frankly they get thousands and thousands of those requests. What you want to sell is that you have a specific answer to their problem, and that requires you to develop a value proposition. So email it and then call. And of course, they're not going to answer your first email or your first call. Do it again, and do it again, and do it again. Like I said, be tenacious and show that you have that staying power. And if you are persistent and you have the right value proposition, in other words, something that they really need, they will eventually see you. It's in their interest to see you. And most government agencies, if you're persistent enough, long enough, dogged enough, they will give you a chance. When you get there, though, do not hand out simple marketing literature. Do not give them just your brochures and your glossies and the generic things. Hand them out a value proposition, if you will, of what their problem is that you're trying to fix and why you have the answer for it. And of course, it's really the purpose is to get them to talk. But I think the real key to getting in front of that customer is to be persistent about it, and don't worry about it when the first 2 or 3 phone calls are not returned. Eventually, you will get through it, which that's been my experience.
Okay, great. I have Steve unmuted. Steve, go ahead with your question for Jim.
Yeah, Jim, how do you fight the urge, and when you talk about being tenacious and persistent, how do you fight the urge to say, oh, if I just keep trying, something's going to turn my way, when in reality there are just opportunities that you just need to dump and move on to something that does have better success factors? So how does number 8 collide with reality sometimes?
The way to resist that urge is to have strict and rigorous bid, no bid decision criteria that you develop in advance, and then have the wherewithal or the gumption to be serious about it. And if you establish, say, 5 pass-fail things, and the opportunity doesn't make all 5 of them, then no matter how attractive it might be, you pass it by. So I think that the key to resist those urges is to hold yourself accountable for the rigor that you've established, and don't try to make exceptions to every rule that you put in place for bid, no bid decisions.
Is that good, Steve? Okay, thank you. So, and to follow up with one of the questions that we had earlier, and we're a little bit kind of right at the edge, so let's try to get this one in and see if we have time to do some others. But is once you've made that inroad into a government customer, how often do you follow up? Is it something that you do on a daily, weekly? I mean, what's your frequency of trying to reach back to them?
The frequency is dependent on the situation, but I would say that if it's far enough in advance of the release of the RFP, you want to do it probably monthly, if not at least quarterly. Obviously, if you do it too many times, you're going to be a pain in the neck. And but if you do it just the strategic number of times, given how much is left before the RFP, I think that that's a better way to approach it.
Okay. And since we're kind of right at the very end of the event, or a little bit actually over, I wanted to see if you wanted to just kind of give a couple of things to highlight or some closing remarks, and then what we can do is, if we didn't get to your specific question, we'll make sure that Jim gets all those questions and we'll be able to respond to you directly. So if you don't mind, just give it a couple of highlights and closing thoughts for people.
I would say, based on some lessons learned that we've experienced over 28 years, here's some closing thoughts for you. Number 1 is be out in front early. Number 2 is make sure you have face time with that customer. Number 3 is team for bandwidth, as I said in one of my keys. Number 4 is involve your program manager and your key personnel as early as you can in the acquisition cycle. They don't parachute in the night before the proposal is submitted and you slap the resume in the package. And then finally, make sure that your teaming agreements are ironclad, and they have levels of effort or scopes of work, or at least swim lanes, something, so that when your prime wins, you have some recourse other than a sort of a nebulous kind of, yeah, well, we might give you some work or whatever. So that's how I would conclude it, I guess.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you to everybody who's participating. And just one last final note, if you go to the URL that you see, the web address on your screen, and we'll include that via email following this event, at that landing page, you'll be able to get all of the past events that we've done, as well as links to register for all the future events that we have coming up. We're also in the process of adding an event that's going to take place in December. It's going to be, I believe, on the 8th. We're just locking down the last few details. But we're going to have all of, or most of, I should say, the panelists who have participated in this GovCon BD series, going back to August, participating in a roundtable discussion, and we're going to make that between an hour and a half, where we'll be able to take your questions, go through a lot of these kinds of strategies, and provide a little bit more detail. We know that you like the shortness and the sort of the quick half-hour nature of these events, but I think that to conclude the year and to get you set out in a direction for 2012, that having that panel together, talking about a bunch of different strategies and tactics and answering your questions would be a good way to finish out 2011 and get ready for next year. So that concludes today's event. We look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you very much, and thank you again, Jim, for your talk. Appreciate it.